Hey everyone, welcome back to the 5 Core Questions with an Expert series. Today we have Tonny Dekker, who leads the enterprise risk competence for the EY organization across the globe. He also serves the firm as a global client service partner and provides transformative solutions for various industries worldwide. We will know more about Tonny at the end of this episode. Now let us begin shooting him the questions. Question number 1. What is enterprise risk management and why is it essential for an organization?
A car has an engine to move. It has a steer to steer, which is management, but also it has brakes. And the brakes are there to prevent accidents. Enterprise risk management is like this. We've all heard that before, but often we forget it. Enterprise risk management is a process that organizations are using to identify, assess and manage risks that could impact their ability to achieve their objectives. You can see risk management as the other side of the medal. With your strategy and your objective, you choose where to bet on, what to achieve. But you need to make sure that you achieve those objectives without harming the organization's ability to achieve those objectives. And that's why you need to assess which risks you take and which one you don't take. With your strategy, you make that decision. And you need to evaluate in how far do I want to take those risks and where do I want to mitigate or manage or react in case a risk appears. And that's so essential for an organization. Often it's seen as a separate department, which is a bit strange, because risk management, the word says it, it's management. It's a fundamental, essential part of management. So any CEO, COO, CFO, anyone in the organization should have a certain risk management awareness. We call it often risk culture, but that's a bit of a word I don't want to use. I want to make sure that risk management is in the heart and minds of any individual in the organization, whereby it is fully correlated and also in balance and aligned to the strategy of the organization. That makes it also often seen as a science and a scientific approach. And yes, it is coordinated, it is systematic, and it has a lot of policies, procedures, and often you see a lot of controls being established at departmental level. But in the end, when you implement an ERM framework, an organization can indeed improve their decision-making process, but should always keep in mind that this is in flux, it's dynamic, and while the environment is changing, you need to adapt each time again to the new risks at the horizon. And that makes it so important for large organizations, as they are more than ever in the international global ecosystem impacted by many events outside their control. And therefore, enterprise risk management is not only a science and or a process, it's an art.
Question number 2. How to identify risks within an organization? How is it done in the current time period compared to earlier years?
Identification of risks has been always there. Entrepreneurs already had it as part of their operating activities of the organization. While organizations were growing and while things became more complex for organizations, you saw a more explicit process of risk identification and management. This systematic approach started with enterprise-wide risk management. That was done in a traditional way of assessing risks, determining what is the likelihood that the risk may actualize for an organization, and in case it is actualizing, what would be the impact. So these events, called risks, were plotted on a likelihood times impact scheme, and then it was decided how to treat them and whether to treat them. Because if something has a low impact and hardly doesn't happen, you could choose not to treat it and just to accept it that the risk is there because it almost does not happen. While going forward in time, you saw that more and more organizations had to go beyond their enterprise risk management and their enterprise risk ecosystem, because there is more beyond the enterprise. So you had to go through the value chain from your suppliers and the suppliers behind that, up to 6 levels or even more, and also in your distribution towards the customer, you had to go further because there was much more distribution dependency than before. This led to a more broadened scope for risk management because the value chain starts to be much more important. Also, with the globalization happening in the last 10 to 20 years, you see a broadening of scope. There are more risks around in the world that can impact you today in your country, in your city. The broadening of this scope, going beyond the enterprise and also going globally, made it much more sophisticated and much more difficult to identify risks for an organization. So when you look at now compared to earlier times, you see a much wider risk universe coming in front of an organization, and at the same time you see a much more complex risk universe with risk drivers causing other risks effectuating. That's called cascading risks. So with these broadening emerging trends, you see also another matter coming and appearing, and that is the risk of emerging trends. If a risk is emerging and you see it timely enough, it's an opportunity. You see now organizations truly using technology and artificial intelligence to analyze if a certain risk is emerging at the horizon and maybe an opportunity today based on which you can attain value in accordance with your strategy and objectives you have. Or you even adapt your strategy and attain through that value and gain the opportunity rather than being confronted with a risk later on. These are the most important changes in risk identification and how to treat risks.
Question number 3. Based on what metrics risk appetite of an organization can be found?
Risk appetite is inherently part of the risk management process at an organization. Overall, risk appetite metrics help an organization to make informed decisions about their risk taking. And it's also to ensure that they are able to achieve their goals while minimizing the potential negative impacts of risk. Now, when it comes to risk appetite, it has to do like in how far you are willing and able to take risk. And it's important to distinguish willingness and ableness. Because one thing is the willingness, that's the tolerance. This is where you say this is the maximum level of risk that an organization is willing to take for a given activity or initiative. This is fine, but while you are willing to take a risk, there's also a capacity, an ableness. So are you enabled to take a certain risk? Because that can be a metric that can show the maximum amount of risk that as organization you are able to absorb. And it can depend on your financial elasticity or because of your operational ability to cope with it. And then it comes further to risk exposure. That is the level of risk that an organization is exposed to, and then you need to determine, can we have more or less unknown risk coming in front of us? And that all comes together then to a risk appetite statement, whereby a qualitative or quantitative statement is made by an organization in its risk taking. This is always not so easy as people seem to think, because it is a very deliberate process between quantification but also qualitative measurements that an organization should take in order to say which type of risk takings they take for different types of activities or initiatives. In the end, it all comes together to key risk indicators. These are the specific metrics that are used to track and to monitor the level of risks associated with those activities and initiatives. And that is where then you can say what appetite do you have or which appetite you do not have. And that is something that an organization can apply more thoroughly while they learn through the journey of risk management how they are going to manage risk and what appetite they have.
Question number 4. Tell us one scenario where you identified risks, developed strategies to control it, and help the organization.
I cannot give now the names of clients and organizations that I helped throughout servicing them in identification of risks and developing strategies to control it. But I can tell the following, that there are organizations approaching us many times that they say, Tony, can you help us in identification of risks when we will enter a certain country, or if we enter a certain market, or we are operating in a certain market and something is changing because of geopolitical issues and or other changes in the regulations and or environment. The most important thing that we then do is indeed to bring this systematic approach whereby you do the identification of risks, whereby you measure the impact and likelihood of the risks, but also do the evaluation with subject matter resources that know exactly this country, or they know the sector, or they know the regulations, but then also that you identify what is the journey taken in these risks. So what are the trends in these risks? I can give an example whereby with a pharmaceutical company we were looking into a country and said specifically for this country, well, there is a corruption risk, there is a certain regulatory risk, but what we see is that things are improving because of a certain membership in the European Union, for example, in this case. And we also see that measurements were taken to put that particular drugs for a certain disease into the packaging of reimbursement. Now, whilst in another country there might be the evaluation that the risk is as big or even less big than in this case, the trends of the improvement in the risk universe were such that you can evaluate and help the company to develop a strategy whereby you can say the timing is now right, with certain measurements of, in this case, the distributors, and with the agreements of the government, you can control it and you can help the organization to enter that market successfully. And that's important because this is all about making things explicit, putting the stress tests and the trends into a visible way towards the management, and to be candidly about is this possible or not, and compare it to what is in the business case being said, because any risk management strategy and scenario stands or falls with a strategy that is behind the business case, because that defines which risk you want to take and which one you don't want to take. So I would always advise to any client, define your strategy. With that, you choose your risks. Evaluate then what is your risk appetite and where do you play your bets on. And then you analyze, is this controllable or not? And that should help you to navigate through your risk management process.
Question number 5. With almost 3 decades of experience, what is your advice for the key decision makers of an organization in terms of enterprise risk management?
With almost 3 decades of experience in professional services, there's a few advices I can share with key decision makers of an organization in terms of enterprise risk management. First of all, the world is uncertain and complex. It is ambiguous to speak about risks, and it's always volatile and changing every day. So the sensation of thinking that risk management is a mathematical function that will give the answers to the organization how to navigate is an utopia. You will never know for sure what is happening the next day. So for me, most important is to tell decision makers that enterprise risk management is embedded everywhere in the organization, in each process, and it should be the responsibility of each co-worker you have in your organization. It is not a standalone process, it is part of the management process. That's why risk tolerance and risk appetite are very important, because that would measure you what you will take and what you will not take. And then above all, risk management is a continuous evaluation process between key decision makers. Today you would decide one way, tomorrow you decide the other way, because the world changed. That's why it's so important for decision makers to use the technology that is existing, to use processes to monitor emerging trends around the context within which an organization is operating in its ecosystem, and to attain the value from that insight and use that as your benefit to achieve the objectives you have put yourself to. And having said that, if you truly embrace that, you suddenly realize that enterprise risk management is not a science, it's an art.
As informed earlier, Tonny is the Global Enterprise Risk Leader and Global Client Service Partner for the Ernst Young Company. He is an alumnus of the University of Groningen who has achieved a doctorate in accounting and finance. He is a registered accountant in Dutch Professional Association of Accountants and also a certified internal auditor by Institute of Internal Auditors. With almost 3 decades of experience, Tonny is a transformative leader who is playing a global client service partner for various industries and leading the enterprise risk competence globally for the EY firm. Before EY, he was working with Arthur Andersen Consulting. With Tonny's well-seasoned experience and knowledge, he is considered as one of the most valuable assets in the enterprise risk consulting world. As far as I know, Tonny is a rare gem with profound knowledge in enterprise risk consulting. He is an inspiring person who is humble and speaks from his heart. And that is why clients from different parts of the world love to get Tonny's valuable insights to manage all sorts of modern and digital disruptions. He had proven and continuously proving that he is a global enterprise risk leader. Before concluding this episode, let me read out the golden words of Tonny Dekker. Now, organizations must embed risk at the forefront of their redefined strategy at the onset of developing new products and services, focusing on customer experience and new technologies. Thank you, Tonny, for your brilliant insights. It's a pleasure having you on this series. Thank you all for listening. Let's catch up with another episode soon. And as usual, let us say ciao for now.